What's up, War Room Nation? Welcome to Inside the War Room, brought to you by War Room Sports. I'm your host this evening. My name is Jimmy. I have my partners at the table with me. Dev, how are you?
What's going on, good people out there?
I got B. Austin also. What's going on, B. Austin?
What's going on, War Room World? If racism occurs in a forest and no one's around, is it still racism?
and with us this evening, we have special guests. We have the founders of PopSpot.com, Power and Oppression and Privilege in Sports. We have Chuck. Chuck Modi, how are you, sir?
I'm great. Great to be here. I came home and nobody followed me home on the way.
We also have Eddie. Eddie Knows, a.k.a. Potluck. Eddie, how are you, sir?
Man, I tell you, I don't take this lightly, but I'm going to say to you, I am a black man that is alive in America today. And I'm blessed to say that one day at a time, because you never know.
That's right. As you know, in the War Room, we talk about everything. We live somewhere in between wretchedness and righteousness. So we're able to talk about a lot of different topics. But we're going to get serious this evening. The guys from PopSpot, just to give you a little bit of background about their website. Again, PopSpot is Power and Oppression and Privilege in Sports, and they do a tremendous job of talking about a lot of social issues involved with sports. So we brought them on this evening to have a conversation about race in sports and whether it matters, why it matters, and just to look at some of the recent topics going around in sports in terms of race. A lot of times when talking sports online the way we do on every website, you see people who say, I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about X's and O's or just numbers. You know, race doesn't matter in sports. I disagree. I think that sports is a microcosm of society at whole. But I brought on some experts, and we're also going to rock and talk about this topic. So, B. Austin, let me start off with you. Let me ask your opinion. Do you think that race matters in sports, and if so, why?
Absolutely. As you so astutely put it, sports is a microcosm of society. It's a reflection of who we are, what we are, and where we are, really in our intellectual advancement as human beings. I would go to a very simple and rudimentary way to gauge whether race still has bearing. Go onto your social media sites, go onto your media sites, sports media sites, and look at the comments section beneath any topic dealing with athletics, especially if it's race related, but even if it's not necessarily race related. Anytime you see more than 100 comments, I guarantee you there is someone speaking of race there. There may be a coward hiding behind anonymity, spewing racial epithets. There may be someone that's holding up the red, black and green flag, trumpeting.
Just say my name, then. Just say my name. You don't got to talk subliminals.
It's there. It's there. So I think that is a way for us to really gauge where we are as a society, and especially as it touches on sports.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely still prevalent.
Shout out to my Pan-African brothers. B. Austin sending subliminal shots at me. But anyway, Modi, let's go to you. Modi, do you think that race matters in sports, and if so, why?
Well, you know the answer is yes, and I'm going to have to completely agree with B. Austin, which is odd because when we talk about Donovan McNabb, we completely disagree. but right now,
dumb that he is. Donovan, if you're watching.
All right, let him talk, B. Austin. We're not going to start. No starting
I'm sorry.
that. No.
It was too early for that. Absolutely, but I think his point is excellent as far as when you look in the comment sections. If you weren't sure, check out those comment sections. And what's interesting about those comment sections, it usually follows an athlete of color getting in trouble. But the comments aren't about the athlete of color getting in trouble. They're about all athletes of color. And it spreads out into a referendum and bigotry and the type of criticism that is not that unlike what we heard Riley Cooper say. Now, even if you pulled the N-word away from Riley Cooper, what he said was, I want to fight imagine if he said just every black man in here. It wouldn't be okay if you removed the N-word and said, I want to fight every black man in here. He didn't make a distinction between the security guard and every other black man, even before you add the N-word. And I would argue if you go into the comment section at any time, you see that same dynamic.
Yeah, and Modi, I can only imagine the kind of comments or of comments and things that you get or tweets that you get, considering what you guys write about. I can only imagine some of the stuff that you guys see.
Yeah.
Well, we get a lot, and I'll say that, but at the same time, the irony is white privilege is also at work. So Dr. Moore is going to get far worse comments for saying the same thing than I would. So even as I get derogatory comments, I still have a layer of protection from white privilege.
Yo, the fact that you're able to admit that says a lot. I'm glad that you know and many others know that white privilege does exist. Believe me, I know it exists. Just going down the panel, Dev, same question to you. What is your opinion about race in sports? Because I'm pretty sure, because you're pretty much the guy that runs our Facebook page, right? So you see all the time where people say, I don't want to talk about this.
Hey, I'm there too.
No, yeah, but Dev run. You know, I'm on Twitter, Dev's on Facebook. We know that. But anyway, the bottom line
I'm
is
on Instagram.
Yeah. I'm the guy who gets stressed out about all the comments, and I bring them back to you guys.
Yeah.
But of course, race matters in sports. We have the conversations every day, like you guys said, especially on our Facebook page. The good thing about Facebook is that, you know, usually everybody on Facebook are being themselves, so they're really not hiding behind anonymity. So, like I gave a shout out on our show last week because, you know, black people, white people, everybody gets involved in some of those conversations. Now, we do have people sometimes who use that cliche that we spoke about, like, oh, it doesn't matter, why do we keep talking about race? You know, sometimes they feel like the issue may be being pushed a little too much, but I do thank people for engaging in the conversation because the conversations need to be had. And we always, in society, ask everybody to engage in these dialogues. So we try to do it in a respectful manner and not attack people when they have an opinion that's a little different from ours, because we did ask them to join the dialogue. So we can't just, you know, shoot at everybody whose opinion we don't agree with. So I do give a shout out to the people who aren't afraid to get into those dialogues.
Yeah, that's
shout out to the Facebook community,
great point,
and our social media supporters at large, man.
Yeah,
We got
absolutely.
a great following.
Yes, we do. And by the way, ladies, Austin's also on Christian Mingle if you're looking for him. Now let's get to
Yes.
Dr. Eddie Moore, aka
And I'm a
Pop
Mormon.
Up.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Now,
sir.
Modi brought up a great point that you and him can make the same exact comment, but because of white privilege, it's taken different. So, in your experience, explain to us why race matters in sports. Because, again, you know, we hear the same adage. Let's talk about sports. Let's leave these social issues out of it. So, you know, you're one of the founders of Pop Spot. Why do you think it's necessary for a Pop Spot to exist?
You know, I even want to take a step back from what Modi said and say that white privilege is the product of white supremacy. So
Absolutely.
for me, the real reason why we seem to have major problems with race in sports is when it challenges the framework of white supremacy, because the consistency in sports, especially as it relates to race and especially in particular as it relates to black men, is really consistent. And it only becomes a problem when people challenge that. So keep in mind, we have these stories that we discuss, that we bring up the individuals and the situations, but the machine keeps turning. The profits keep producing. The structure of white supremacy keeps staying in place. And I think that for me, that's part of what we're trying to do with Pop Spots, is not only have a discussion about race, but to also factor in this structural foundational piece that is often challenged. So race becomes a problem when you challenge white supremacy and you bring up issues around race, which is a lot of times equating people of color and especially black men. Because, again, you can get the coach at the Boston Celtics being appointed with very limited experience, and it's almost like, oh, well, of course he's qualified. He's coached at a mid-level. He's won. He's gone to the finals twice. And it's taken Doc Rivers, like he's had to win championships. He's had to, like the same person who took that job before had to have, our mama and daddy told us long ago, you got to work twice as hard.
Twice as hard. Yeah,
but my point is that whiteness, white supremacy, when that's not challenged, race is not a problem. But when you challenge that, I think that's where we begin to face these kinds of issues. Again, Riley Cooper's incident happened weeks ago, months ago. It was only a problem when someone showed it on video. This cat had been participating, I would argue, with this framework, with this mindset for years, since he was at the University of Florida.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's be clear that race only becomes a problem when we challenge the structure of white supremacy, and that's one of the primary goals of Pop Spots.
Absolutely.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, it's the institution and the foundation, if you will, of that institution that is the real problem that you challenge, as opposed to particular individuals. Is that kind of where you're going, Dr. Potluck?
Yes, sir. I think that's really where the challenge lies, because we're often trying to solve a problem in a system we don't understand. And so we do really well highlighting Riley Coopers and all the kinds of folks who do these stupid, idiotic kinds of things. But we never look at the structures that produce these individuals, that allow them to participate in these behaviors for years and years. Now, again, I think the most interesting story that's up right now is this Manziel story. You know, where, you know, you saw Cam Newton his family took a beating for years, man. I mean, they just really kind of cleared his family after years of investigation.
Reggie Bush as well.
Right? Reggie Bush is another great. Here we have this kid not only participating in some of this behavior as alleged, but if you remember the pictures, he was flashing the money. Like, he was showing the world, I just got paid. And people are still trying to say, is it true? Is it not true? Did he do it? Did he not do it? Like, the space he has before being said that he's guilty has been the ultimate white supremacy, ultimate white privilege, where, again, if this is Cam Newton, if this is Reggie Bush, I mean, they were guilty before it even hit the newspaper.
You're absolutely right.
Terrell prior to that.
Well, that's a function of the perception of black males in society at large. Period. Anytime
that's a narrative that's been told for so long that you'd be surprised how many people actually believe that. You know, we're all the same. We do this. Let me ask you guys a question.
It's subconscious. It's a subconscious thing, I think, in a lot of instances. Go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't mean.
No, it's okay. But he brought up the Riley Cooper incident. Let me ask you guys a question about this, because someone posed this to me on Twitter, and I just want to get your take on this. If Riley Cooper, because I know you guys at Pop Spot, you talk about all kinds of human rights, but if Riley Cooper, if his remark was homophobic, if he used the F word, as they say, would the response have been the same, or would it have been more harsh? And I'll start with you, Modi.
You could just look at Tim Hardaway to answer that question. Tim Hardaway was banished for years, and Tim Hardaway actually offers a great example because he's a story of redemption. He's gone out and campaigned with LGBT rights groups over years. He was fired from his job at the time with the NBA. I don't necessarily against it, but we haven't let Tim Hardaway back in yet, and this is 5 years, and he has been a champion. I would love to see, it's a dream of mine, it won't happen, but I would love to see that kind of transformation and redemption of Riley Cooper years from now, to pull some of the folks who might think like him in a new direction. But for that to happen, you actually have to have some kind of punishment. You actually have to have some kind of consequence. And when you talk about the individual to the institutional, I think you got to talk about Riley Cooper and then the institutional reaction. Chip Kelly, the coach of the Philadelphia Eagles, did nothing. A fine? Really? Roger Goodell, who suspends folks for sneezing, did nothing. Really? You know, the media, we haven't heard a whole lot from them. And there's precedents, by the way, of fining folks or suspending folks from the N-word going back many, many years. But if you look at the whole Chip Kelly, he didn't go consult his players to ask what they thought they should do. He just went ahead with a suspension. And you have some Philadelphia Eagles players saying, well, if this were Andy Reid, he would have handled it much differently. There are people, a prominent Eagles player said that anonymously. So you have no suspension on top of that. There's no consequence. So what kind of message does that send about what Riley Cooper did?
Now, hold on. Also, before you go, let's get Dev's perspective on this. Dev, if he had made a homophobic comment as opposed to what he said, do you think would have been completely different?
I'm not. I wouldn't say completely, but I can harken back to something that B. Austin mentioned on our last podcast. You know, the gay and lesbian community seem to hold a little bit more political power right now than we do as black folks.
I mean,
So
unified.
yeah, so the uproar may have been a little bit greater because, um, as you've seen, like Dr. Moore said, he said this a long time ago. The only reason that it's a story is because it got leaked. So but that was only like a week, less than 2 weeks ago, and it seems like the world has already moved on. So I do think the uproar would have been a little bit bigger had it been another
Okay.
issue.
All right, B. Austin, what's your opinion on the matter?
Um, well, man, just to piggyback on what Devin just said, which was pointing to what I mentioned on our last podcast. The the gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender community definitely holds a lot more political power right now, as it stands in this country. And some of that also, to kind of touch on something that may be a little controversial to the positions that we hold, and I'll include myself. The gay and lesbian community, not only do they hold a certain amount of political power, but they're doing things to, on some level, dispel some of the stereotypes and myths. So when you look at how black people are portrayed in the media, there are things that some folks can point to and say, well, we always thought you guys were animals. We always thought you guys behaved as animals. We always thought you guys were this. We thought you were that. Let's look at what's going on in your communities in Chicago, in Baltimore, in Flint, in Gary, Indiana, in places like this, in Philadelphia, in our hometown. Let's look at what's going on in these communities. Let's look at the art. Let's look at the music that you guys put out. And a lot of that is how the media portrays us. But there are things that are out there that confirm, I guess, what some people would say is the reason that black folks are looked at the way they are.
Yeah,
And
and that's
so
all bullshit. Excuse my
yeah,
language.
of course, of course. Well, I'm not going to say it's all bullshit. I'm going
No,
to
it
say
is.
the largest proportion of it is bullshit versus the gay and lesbian community who are going to say, well, who I love and what I do in my bedroom really shouldn't be used to take away my human rights, so to speak. So that's the argument, and that's where. And then economics. Economically, they're unified, and we all know economics is the backbone and foundation of political power, period. So,
No, I agree with that. But in terms of all the excuses that people make or what they point to is all BS because, I mean, if you really want to get technical and break it down, outside of Chicago, never mind. I'm not even going to get into that because
No,
I'll make this video
yeah, because
a lot longer.
I don't like when people from the outside do that. Like now, I've called out members of my own community on plenty of occasions, because their focus seems to be away from, what we're doing to ourselves. But it kind of seems like the people on the outside listen to us do that, so they feel that they can use that when they're talking about us, from an
absolutely.
outside
And it's
perspective.
a
And yeah,
distraction.
and
And
Riley
Modi,
Cooper did not.
it's
Riley
definitely a
go ahead,
distraction.
Modi.
Cooper
Modi hit
did
it right on
not
the
learn
head.
the
It's a
N word
distraction.
from Jay-Z.
Not at
Oh
all.
yeah,
Not
That's
at
all.
all.
no,
All I'm
no,
saying
no,
is
no.
Riley Cooper did not learn the N word from Jay-Z, and the N word's been around a lot longer than hip hop.
Yeah.
So all of these discussions are often
Exactly.
distractions.
They're all BS, and it's not like Riley Cooper got caught on camera like a word slipping while he was rapping with the Jay-Z song.
Yeah.
He used ER, and it's not the same thing. I just
And it just came out
boils
too
my
easily.
blood.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
it definitely flowed off. Let me say this, and because I want the response from Dr. Potluck and Modi on this. One of the things that I find that we do in War Room Sports, and gentlemen, since you guys are on, you can shoot me down if I'm off base in this statement. Is I find that we find ourselves shooting at both sides of the spectrum. So we've got a large contingent of African American fans, or listeners who want to consistently and constantly pull what we like to call the race card. Everything is a function of racial injustice. Everything is a function of racism. Everything is a function of what's going wrong in society due to racism, as opposed to taking accountability and responsibility for their own lives and their own success and their own upliftment. So that's one side of the equation. Then on the other side of the equation, what I find is you do have our fans of other ethnicities. We've got a lot of white fans. We got a lot of, Caucasian fans that kind of come around, and they, because racism is such an ugly topic in this country, it's such an ugly thing to deal with, they rather act like we're in a post-racial society, move past it. And the biggest problem I have with that is the lack of acknowledgement. And I think that's something that really burns me up. I'm not looking for reparations. I'm not looking for a handout. I'm not looking for this. I'm not looking. Just acknowledge that it's there. Don't argue back with me and act like it's not there when we have a constant and consistent dialogue running because of the things that are going on in society. So it's kind of like two sides of the same coin. They're both extremes. We've got on one hand folks that like to act like, well, it's racism is gone, and look, you've got a black president, and look,
don't get me started on that.
We've come so far. We're kumbaya. There's racism from black folks towards white folks and all of that.
That's one of my biggest pet peeves, like as far as terms go. Two of them: post-racial America, yeah, right, and reverse racism.
First off, black African Americans cannot be racist. We don't have power to be racist, but that's either here nor there. Go ahead, Dan.
I just wanted to point that out, like that post-racial America, like that term, it bothers me because, I don't know if the people who like to use that term really, really deep down think that that's true, or, is it just another smokescreen that people like to throw out there? I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah. Now, Dr. Moore, we've talked about a lot. I was going to start it off by asking your opinion in terms of if this had been a gay slur, would it have been covered different, or would he have been treated different? And then you can just get into some of the topics we just discussed in terms of post-racial society and things of that nature.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that Riley Cooper is a white man. And what, in my experience, this nation has consistently shown that there are some real benefits to being white in America. So I'm not sure how different things may have played out. I think the one thing Riley Cooper has working in his favor, no matter if he used a homophobic slur or a racial slur, is whiteness. He gets the benefit of the doubt. He gets grace. He gets space. So what's really frustrating is in the video you see a community of participation around Riley Cooper, right? Like he is talking to friends. He is with a group of folks who have been a part of his circle. In his period of recovery, there's no conversation about how we're all taking a look at how this is a part of what's going on around us and how we're all sorry about that. For me, that's the sign, and where I'm mostly frustrated, whether it's homophobic, whether it's gay, racial, sexism. I think when the person shows that there's a comprehensive effort to not only work on himself but also the selves of those around him, that's when I get a real signal that there's some serious commitment to that. But he really doesn't have to do that, because once he closes the door on this, everywhere he goes, white will pay off. And that's the piece that we have to keep in mind. I don't use the term post-racial because I think Talib Kweli says it best in his new album. We're not in a post-racial period. We're in a most racial period. I mean,
talk to him.
If you look at what's happening, even in the last 3 or 4 months in this nation, from Riley Cooper to Paula Dean, but Trayvon Martin, where a black man, a young black boy, is killed, right? Like, the verdict is not guilty. Like, the value to black life, the message there for people to say post-racial is really, for me, perplexing. But I can understand it because I understand white supremacy. I understand cognitive dissonance. And I think that's the piece that people, all of us, need to continue to do work on. Absolutely. Is that there is a system that impacts all of us, that we are operating on, that we're being influenced by. And no greater influence happens than in the world of sports. This is a system designed in a white supremacy structure for the benefit of whiteness, particularly monetarily. And we have not seen this kind of revenue gain for white America, white males, especially in power in the last 20 years in the entire history of sports. So I think that that's the piece that we got to keep asking the questions about, not post-racial, not most racial, but is it still good to be white in America, particularly in the words of sports?
Yeah, and you know what it is, and you brought up another great point. And this is one point I'm going to get to before we get out of here. There are a lot of instances right now. If you look at what happened to the Jackie Robinson statue,
yes,
Andrew Jones, Riley Cooper,
yes,
it seems like every day. What else was it, Dev? Wayne Simmons from the Flyers gets it everywhere he goes.
Before last season started, somebody up in Canada threw a banana onto the ice.
Yeah,
and just Sunday, or was it just Sunday evening in San Francisco at the baseball game? Adam Jones, the star of Baltimore Orioles, there was a banana thrown in his direction on the field near the end of the game. Now, the guy who did it, he actually called the newspaper and copped to it. But I want to read you some of his quotes, and I want to get you guys' thoughts on whether you believe this guy or not, because the banana was thrown in the vicinity of Jones. He tweeted about it. But the guy said that he's embarrassed and shocked by the outcome. In hindsight, he wished he didn't do it, and he apologizes. He basically said he was disappointed in the team. He grabbed the banana from one of the carts and threw it onto the field in frustration. He said it had nothing to do with Adam Jones being there. It had nothing to do with him being black. He was just frustrated with his team, and the first thing he grabbed, he threw onto the field. And he said on Monday morning, once he saw the news and he saw how much backlash it was getting, and he hadn't even heard of it supposedly until Monday morning, he basically said he called the newspaper and gave those quotes that I just gave you guys. Is there anybody on this panel that believes that the guy didn't know what he was doing?
Well, first off,
yeah, I believe him.
In the words of Eddie, in the words of Dr. Potluck, he's going to get the benefit of the doubt because he has the complexion for the connection. So, but at the end of the day, you have to understand what that means to do something like that. No one, and just like Dr. Potluck just said, who was around him that didn't point that out? So even if you didn't understand it, didn't someone pull his coat? Like, listen, that could have been taken a certain way. That's my problem.
For me personally, I never assumed that someone of another group, I'm not even going to limit it to race, of another group is sensitive to what I'm sensitive to, because as you say, from their perspective and vantage point, why should they be? How could they be? They don't live my experience, nor do they understand what my sensitivities are, what I've been through, or what my background, the people in my background have been through.
Okay, so don't start copping pleas when you get called to the carpet for it.
True. No, he's definitely trying to cop a plea and dodge it, but I wasn't offended personally in almost any of these situations because I expect that behavior.
So it's basically you're just saying you're not surprised. Like I don't know this guy. I don't know his heart. I don't know if he's telling the truth or not. But like Jimmy said, it's like you just have to understand what you're doing sometimes, even if he's telling the truth. You have to understand what you're doing. First of all, a banana is the wrong thing to throw. A black guy is the closest thing. It's I don't know, man. It's just
yeah. Modi, what do you think about this, Modi?
Well, yeah, I think all these incidents add up, and when I think one of the traps sometimes we could fall into is trying to analyze each incident in isolation and trying to find it out, rather than look at the pattern. Let's look. These 10 incidents are happening. You know what? Okay, I'll give you 2 or 3. Maybe they're wrong. There's a common denominator in the pattern, and when the pattern keeps going one way, we have to look at the whole. We know hate groups have risen, starting in 2000 and then again in 2008. The Obama backlash is real. We know all these incidents are a reflection of what's going on in society. We know the reflection of the response to the George Zimmerman verdict. We see that where I believe it was 51% of whites agreed with the verdict, and all of a sudden everybody turned into Jeffrey Toobin overnight, and looking at law books to try to figure out what the decision was. But we know, and I know this as a white person, when I spoke to a lot of white friends after 9/11, when our security was threatened, when our way of life was threatened, we were losing our minds trying to figure out, we'd pass any law, Patriot Act, this act, that act, go to war, invade countries that didn't touch us, confuse dictators, anything. We didn't look at this chips fall where they may. So I think there's generally a different reaction to race when your security doesn't intrinsically or viscerally feel threatened, because I believe the Zimmerman verdict was very, very easy. I do want to say something that I thought, where I think it has to do with the pathology of privilege, to re-talk about pathology, because a lot of times in the sports media they talk about pathology in terms of people of color, but we don't talk about pathology of privilege. So, for instance, the Joe Paterno affair and the response to Joe Paterno would never be cast in the light of what's wrong with white people? How come white people are hitting in the streets, rioting, and defending Joe Paterno? It's never cast in those white racial terms. So you don't see that. You don't see that from sports writers. And that benefit of the doubt, Michelle Alexander, she had a term for it recently about the problem was that she called it the Zimmerman mindset. And that Zimmerman mindset that where you mistook all black men for one is what we really should be talking about, because it's not an individual problem, it's an institutional problem, and that's part of our policy. As we should know, yesterday, the Stop New York City Stop and Frisk campaign was deemed unconstitutional, something we've known about for over a decade, but it was deemed unconstitutional by a court of law. How much damage was done there because the New York City Police Department employed institutionally, not individually, that Zimmerman mindset. So I think we have to move that discussion to that Zimmerman mindset on an institutional level.
Yeah, great points. Great points.
Well, I had to go to the American flag because I'm having thoughts of Gabby Gifford, in the Olympics, where again we're talking about this post-racial time, but as Charles mentioned, there's a accumulation, there's a consistency that's being shown here, and I think especially when it comes to athletes of color, but in particular black athletes, that it seems to me that this issue of white supremacy, racism, is being really and continues to be really consistent. But I think the other part that has to be examined that often goes unattended in many of these situations, because again, I don't know this cat who threw out the banana, but I mean, since LeBron and the King Kong cover photo, and the way they depicted Obama and Michelle in some of the newspapers and New York Times magazines around these monkey images, like this is a Joe Ward, the Wayne Simmons, in hockey. This is a long-standing, like, you don't throw bananas at black people kind of rule, you know what I'm saying? And for this cat to say, I have no clue about that, I got to give some room for grace, but I would find that surprising. But again, what's the consistent denominator in all of these instances? And that, to me, is white supremacy, that we often don't even say on some shows. We don't even talk about in some spaces. And I'm just asking that we start to introduce that in addition to our conversations about race, sexism, privilege, homophobia, so on and so forth.
The phrase white supremacy has a very, very negative connotation in this country, because when white supremacy is spoken about, we think of extremes. We think of white hooded men, night riders, burning crosses, swastikas, militaristic Caucasian men in the mountains, preparing for doomsday. So I think that for our listeners,
anyone who would attend the Kenny Chesney concert is what you're saying?
Yo, shout out to Kenny Chesney, because I heard that you're not like that. But we have this negative connotation.
Actually, Kenny Chesney did make some really strong remarks against that. So go ahead.
We heard Kenny is cool. So Kenny, you can come on the War Room anytime. Reaching out.
Kenny came out stronger than Chip Kelly.
Yeah, stronger than Chip. But so Dr. Moore, I guess what I'm saying is for our audience and for our listeners and for our viewers, define white supremacy and what it means in 2013 within the context of sports, within the context of our dialogue here, because people, when as a white person, if I'm watching this and I have a similar frame of mind for me, I'm like, I ain't putting no white hood on. No, I ain't lynching black folks. I mean, I got a black friend.
So basically, Dr. Moore, basically, and as you can see, I had to change my flag too. Basically, what we're asking you to do is define white supremacy as it relates to the modern day and also sports.
Jimmy, I think I was pretty clear in my request.
I know, but you were
he's a doctor. He's a PhD.
You're rambling a little bit, so I just want to get right to the point. So do that for us, Dr. Moore.
He's a PhD, though. We got big words on deck.
My brother, you have hit on a very critical point about when you say white supremacy, there are certain pictures that come up in the minds of people. And it's important that those pictures come up because those pictures are true, okay? But what I talk about when I talk about white supremacy is not only those visuals of those extremists that have those extreme views, but to remember that in our country's history, particularly around some of the structures that we exist by or we still participate in today, that philosophy was a big part of the mindset of the people who created them. Sports is one of them, okay? So it's important that when you look at white supremacy that you got to keep that picture in mind because you want to ask people, do you still think in this way? And in 2013, sometimes when I ask people that question, they still see people or know people in 2013 that think like it's 1913. Okay, so it's important to understand that mindset and that picture. But the other piece is the psychological impact. Even though I don't believe I'm a nigger, I know that in the environment where I grew up, people use nigger all the time. So I don't have a belief that I'm a nigger, but that mindset, that psychology still penetrates the way I think and challenges and push-ups against me trying to be more positive and more productive in my thinking. So I don't believe in that philosophy of nigger, but the psychology of it still hits my mindset, my brain. And that's what I'm talking about when I talk about white supremacy. And no other place that I think that it's more prevalent than in a place of sports where often you see people of color, particularly in male professional sports, there are black men in particular in the ownership and the intellect of that organization remains in the structure of the original design. So even though the people may even not believe in that way, they still fit in that structure, and we often see people often being influenced and their minds penetrated by that. And that's why I want to introduce white supremacy into this conversation, because it's more about the philosophical, psychological impact. You don't have to talk like a white supremacist to think like a white supremacist. Because if you've never interrupted the psychology that it penetrates in your mind, you can still produce the same behavior patterns. Yeah. And that's the conversation that I want to introduce into the world of sports, especially because it seems like no other place does that show up more often than in sports.
That's a very valuable. That's a real quick, Jimmy. That's a very valuable point, Dr. Moore, because I think we wrapping. That's a very valuable point because I think as you look at the NFL, we'll say, and NBA as well, but NFL, when you look at the hierarchy of organizations, it's a paternal structure, it's a patriarchal structure. Your coach is your dad, your coach's daddy is the GM, your GM's daddy is the owner of the squad, and once you get above the coaching ranks, you don't see black faces, and yet 72% of the players are black. So are you really speaking to the impact of that organizational structure on America at large, on black folks at large, on white folks at large, on other ethnicities? Is that kind of where you're going?
Absolutely. I think in this realm, we're talking specifically about sports because I think in the case of the 49ers, I forget the family name there. Somebody can help me out.
DeBartolo.
Right. DeBartolo. Like the son was like 30 years old when he was promoted to the highest position, right? Like it was like not only did he receive the promotion, but it's like he's supposed to be there. I mean, his daddy did it, his granddaddy did it, so psychologically, of course, he can do it. Where, again, I think that the message that sends psychologically, not only in the sport of football, but to America at large, you could go to Wall Street, see the same example. You can go to the car industry, see the same example. Banking industry, same example. I mean, you can look at the housing. I mean, it's amazing when you look at the power structure, that framework is still consistent. But in this world that we're talking about, sports, I think it's really imperative that we look at it and examine it, because I think it is part of some of the challenges that we face when we're talking about the issues that we're talking about today.
Yeah. Modi, you said you had something you want to say, Modi?
Yeah, I thought he was talking about Kyle Shanahan over here in the D.C. area for a second. He's talking about that privilege. but, you know, on that point, listen to some of the offensive coordinators in the NFL. Shanahan's their last name. Shula's their last name. Schottenheimer's their last name. Ryan's their last name. These last names sound familiar to anybody? And if you were to look at the offensive coordinators, you have a greater likelihood of being an offensive coordinator because your last name is, your daddy was a head coach, than you are a coach of color. And I want to close on this point about the Chip Kelly, because I think he's been getting off scot-free. Dr. Moore said, well, you don't have to talk like Riley Cooper to have some of the behaviors. Well, Chip Kelly speaks nice. He seems like an affable guy, seems nice enough. But when he put his coaching staff together, there were 17 hires who weren't assistants, 17 coaches. Only Deuce Staley and Ted Williams, who's been there 16 years, prior Philly coaches, are the only African-American coaches. The other 15, the great majority he brought elsewhere, are white. Are you telling me throughout the whole league and college he couldn't have brought some new coaches of color into that pipeline and only keep the other two who were previously there? I have a problem with that type of thinking. So to me, no, he's no Riley Cooper at all, but he's got some strains in there that's infecting his mindset.
Yeah, and I'll get you gentlemen's last thoughts before we get out of here. I just want to say Dr. Moore brought up a great point, is that you don't have to be that to be, to have that mindset, because a lot of people, and I know B. Austin will agree with this, they practice white supremacy without even knowing. And, they take advantage of white privilege without even knowing. So that's a great point, Dr. Moore.
Yeah,
I'll get everybody's. Yeah, they ain't even know. Before we get out of here, I just want to give everybody his last thoughts on the topic of race and sports. B. Austin, what is your last thought?
Make love, not war. Peace.
Okay.
Everybody. Post-raciality.
Modi, what is your final thoughts on this topic?
I have no thought. I just want to say thank you guys a lot for allowing us this space, and it was a great conversation, and we look forward to coming back.
Absolutely. We appreciate it. Dev, any last thoughts you want to put out there?
Yeah, we definitely have you guys back. We got to do this. We got to make this a regular thing. But, yeah, I just want to reiterate how important it is to have these conversations. So, I know people might see this video when it comes up and see what the title is and, want to shy away from it. But the conversations need to be had. So, participate.
Don't be scared.
Yeah. Dr. Moore, as we affectionately call you in the war room, Dr. Potluck.
I appreciate that.
Any final thoughts on this topic?
Well, I can't even imagine how many times we hear the words, sports is life. And I think it's really important, especially with young people in your lives, that you understand the dynamics of all the race and sexism and homophobia that we've tried to talk about here today, and its impact on the mindset, but most importantly, the structure of white supremacy, especially for those of you who have young people, because if they're participating in sports, it's most likely leading into some lifelong kinds of practices as well. And nothing kills the spirit of people of color, particularly black people, and especially black males, like white supremacy. And so there's no wonder we have more in prison, we have more in dropout, we have more, pick a number. And so let's take hold to sports as life and examine white supremacy as we look at sports, racism, homophobia, and all the other things.
Absolutely. And again, I just want to say thank you, gentlemen, from popspot.com. Go check out their work, POPS. Spot.com. You'll see it right under Modi's name, and I'll put it in the description box for this video, popspot.com, to go check out their work. Last thing I just want to say is join the conversation. Leave a comment. Let us know how you feel about everything we talked about, because Dev brought up something very important in the beginning of this episode, which was the fact that we like to have the dialogue. You're not going to agree with everything we say. We're not going to agree with everything you say, but let's talk. So don't shy away from the topic. I already know how it is. In terms of putting out content as it relates to sports. Anything with any kind of social significance, people shy away from. If we're just slandering an athlete, we'll get a bunch of views and comments. So don't be afraid to have this conversation. Watch the video. Share this video with your friends because it's an important conversation. And let's start the dialogue. Again, this is War Room Sports. You can find us at warroomsports.com, or we're all over the internet. Any website you go to, you'll find us. And as we always say,
TV.
Yeah, warroomsportstv.com. But listen, as we always say, don't accept mediocrity and be steadfast in the war against ignorance. We'll see you chumps on top.
Kuwait is the war room with 5 nights at the round table, 5 Philly guys diversified and educated.